Picture growing up in rural Indiana. Wide open fields, 100-acre farms, family dinners cooled by the distant hum of tractors. That was Axton Betts Hamilton's childhood, a world grounded in simple routines, homemade meals, and quiet Midwestern warmth. Her mother, Pam, balanced ledgers by day as a tax preparer. Her father labored in the fields. Life was comfortable, predictable, safe. Picture this. You're 11 years old. The world feels big and full of possibility. And yet, behind the warmth of every family photo lies a secret, so deeply personal that no child should ever bear its weight. But then Grandpa passed away. Axton was just 11. Soon enough, things started to shift. Pam found comfort in jewelry. Cheap, costume pieces, purchased, it seems, in fits of grief. Their mail began vanishing. Letters from friends, specialized farming journals, monthly bills, postal threads cut without a spark. Axton's family suspected mail theft, predicted outsiders were behind it. But what if the threat was closer than they dared imagine? Fast forward to college. At age 19, Axton asked for her credit report, curious rather than concerned. What landed in her hands, wrapped in an inch-thick envelope, was not a blank slate. It was a 10-page dossier of debt, overdue accounts, collection notices she'd never signed up for. Her credit score had plummeted to a staggering 380 before her first essay had even been graded. She called the police. The state troopers listened, typed up a 2-line report. Unknown suspect opened credit cards in complainant's name. She was told to use it with creditors. That was it. No lights or sirens. No justice in sight. 2 decades later, in 2013, her mother died. And then, the bombshell. Axton's father opened a dusty box of Pam's papers and found a credit card statement, over its limit, and listed in Axton's name. Here's the chiller. The statement lay side by side with Axton's birth certificate. The real shock came after her mother's death. Axton's father discovered something chilling, a credit card statement in her name. It wasn't tucked away with generic files. It was sitting in the same folder as her birth certificate. In that instant, everything shifted. Her mother, Pam Elliott, who raised her, who tucked her into bed and wiped her tears, had not been a victim. She was the perpetrator. Over nearly 20 years, she'd stolen identities, not just Axton's, but her husband's and her father-in-law's too. With nearly $500,000 misappropriated, the person behind the fraud was closer than any stranger ever could be. That clear, devastating moment, when relief, betrayal, rage, and grief collided, revealed the harsh truth. The identity thief who haunted their family for nearly 20 years wasn't a stranger. It was the very woman they called Mom. What compels a mother to steal her own child's identity? What cracks in trust lie buried beneath decades of hidden crime, kind messages, and shared childhood rituals? And how did Axton navigate the ruins of her credit, her trust, and her life before, during, and after this revelation? Stay with us. Over the next hours, we'll trace Axton's journey, from childhood discovery to scholarly rigor to the legal and emotional reckoning that followed. You'll hear real papers, real pain, and real perseverance. It's a story about family, betrayal, and identity. After that shocking discovery in 2013, Axton began asking questions most of us never imagined asking about our parents. How long had this been happening? Was it only her name, or others in the family too? And perhaps the hardest question of all, why? What force could turn a parent into a predator of trust? She remembered the missing mail, the small lies that fell harmless at the time. Had it all been a setup, carefully stitched over the years? Could the woman who kissed her forehead goodnight also be the one draining her future? In college, she'd lived like so many of us, borrowing textbooks, making ramen stretch across 2 meals, thinking the world was still hers to shape. And yet, every time she applied for something as small as a store card, rejection came swiftly and coldly. She blamed systems. She blamed bureaucracy, never her own blood. That night in 2013, as her father went through those files again, 1 envelope turned to 2, then 3, each with a different name, each tied back to her mother. Nearly $500,000 in fraudulent accounts, spread quietly across decades. Her father, too, had been a victim. Her grandfather's name had been used. It wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a lifelong shadow. What would you do in that moment? Would you forgive a mother who could no longer answer your questions? Would you fight to uncover every last debt? Or would you walk away, afraid of what else you might find? For Axton, the choice was to face it head-on. She didn't just want the truth, she needed it. That need would lead her to dig through bank statements, police reports, and even her own childhood memories, trying to stitch together the missing years. And so began her real investigation, not as a detective with a badge, but as a daughter with scars. On the surface, the Betts family was like any other rural Indiana household. Pam, the mother, kept the books for a local tax service. She was quiet, meticulous, and often described as helpful to a fault. Her husband worked long hours on the farm, and Axton was the only child, bright, curious, and fiercely attached to her parents. But every now and then, little cracks appeared, bills that were lost in the mail, a sudden change in spending habits, costume jewelry arriving in boxes. Pam always had a reason, always had a smile, and the family, like most, gave her the benefit of the doubt. Have you ever looked back at your childhood and thought, how did I miss that? At what point does trust blind us to the signs that were always there? It began subtly. Mail disappeared. Magazines stopped arriving. Neighbors whispered about local theft, blaming the postal routes. Pam nodded sympathetically, even joined in their frustration. But what Axton didn't know was that her own mail she was too young to even expect, was being carefully controlled. Then, a warning letter arrived. Her father's name misspelled, but the debt was real. When he asked Pam about it, she brushed it off. Clerical error. I'll handle it. And she did, by making it disappear. Through high school, Axton excelled in academics. She dreamed of becoming an educator. Her parents encouraged her to save, to plan for college, to be responsible. All the while, something was growing in the shadows. Credit cards, bank lines, and overdue balances, all tied to her name. Imagine walking through those years, thinking you were building a future, only to find out later someone else was borrowing your future like it was theirs. Would you have noticed the signs? Or would you have trusted your parents, like most of us did at that age? When Axton turned 19, she applied for a store card, denied. She thought nothing of it. College was stressful enough. Classes, part-time work, new friends. But then, she sent away for her credit report. It arrived like a storm. 10 pages. Multiple accounts. Collections she'd never heard of. A credit score below 400 before she'd ever borrowed a cent. She called her parents in tears. Pam comforted her. Don't worry, honey, this happens to a lot of people your age. Identity theft is everywhere. She was right. Identity theft was everywhere. But not in the way she meant. Over the years, the explanations piled up. Clerical errors, bank mistakes, system glitches. Pam always had a story. And Axton, like many of us, wanted to believe her mother more than the mounting evidence. How far would your loyalty stretch before you started asking real questions? Is there a moment when love becomes the very blindfold that keeps you from seeing the truth? Years passed, and then, in 2013, that cabinet was finally opened. Inside, credit statements, some nearly 2 decades old. Each one a thread leading to a woman they thought they knew. A mother, a wife, a thief. Little did they know, this was only the beginning. For a while, everything seemed fine. Laura maintained the perfect cover. The doting mother, the responsible caregiver. But in 2016, a school enrollment officer noticed something strange. 2 sets of medical record for the same child, both under Laura's name, but with completely different birth details. At first, it looked like a clerical error. But what if it wasn't? How does a woman with no official past create a new life so flawlessly? And more importantly, who was she before she became Laura? A quiet knock on her door would change everything. Detectives visited her home under the guise of a routine verification. They asked her simple questions: date of birth, former addresses, previous employment. Each answer was smooth, almost too smooth. One officer later described it as talking to someone who had rehearsed every line of their life. But one thing stood out. Laura never offered any detail unless asked. It was as if she was reading from a script. Investigators began digging: driver's licenses, social security records, even old hospital files. What they found was more than unsettling. Multiple identities, each leading to another dead end. It was like chasing a ghost that never wanted to be caught. How does someone live a life this elaborate without a single person recognizing them? Would you know if your neighbor wasn't who they claimed to be? Her friends started to notice things too. Stories about her childhood kept changing. One day, she was raised in Ohio. The next, she had fond memories of Texas summers. A neighbor remembered asking her about her parents. Laura just smiled and said, "They're not in the picture." That was it. No names, no details. What kind of person raises a child with a life built on secrets? Was she protecting her son or hiding from him? The turning point came with a single phone call. A woman hundreds of miles away reported her identity stolen 10 years ago. Her name? Exactly the same as Laura's. The birth date? A match. But the real Laura was alive, confused, and ready to cooperate. This wasn't just a lie. This was a life stolen. And now, the pieces were finally starting to fall into place. By early 2017, the pressure was mounting. Credit agencies began sending strange notices to Laura's mailbox. Accounts she never mentioned, debts from years ago, in cities she swore she had never visited. But every letter had her name printed across the top. It wasn't a mistake anymore. It was a trail, one she could no longer control. Amidst all this chaos, there was a little boy, barely old enough to understand what a lie even meant. He loved his mom. To him, she was the whole world. Did she carry the weight of her choices, knowing one day this boy would ask her, "Who are you really?" How do you explain to a child that the life you gave him was borrowed? Everything changed one rainy afternoon when police arrived with a warrant. Not for her arrest, but for her past. They seized documents, computers, photographs. Laura stood silent, her lips pressed into a thin line as officers searched every drawer, every cabinet. What they found would not only expose her, it would rewrite her entire existence. In the depths of an old file, investigators uncovered a birth certificate, faded, almost forgotten. The name matched the real woman's, but the photo didn't. That single document linked her to a woman who disappeared more than a decade earlier under mysterious circumstances. Was this the first time she stole a life? Or just the first time she got caught? When the handcuffs finally closed around her wrists, Laura said only one thing. "I did what I had to do. No tears, no protest." Just a calm resignation that chilled everyone in that room. But what exactly had she done and why? At the station, detectives pressed her for hours. Who was she before she became Laura? Where did she come from? Why take someone else's name? At first, she gave nothing but silence. But slowly, cracks appeared. A slip of an accent. A reference to a place not on any of her official documents. Each detail was a breadcrumb leading back to a life she'd tried to erase. Public records began to reveal a pattern. New names, new addresses, each lasting just long enough for her to rebuild before vanishing again. In one state, she was a nursing aide. In another, a small business owner. In each life, there was always a child, always a story of starting fresh, always a reason to keep her past hidden. Investigators finally tracked down the so-called family she claimed to have. The parents, the cousins, the distant aunt. None of them existed. It was an elaborate web of fabricated Facebook profiles, fake phone numbers, even photoshopped family pictures. How far would you go to erase your past? How many lies would it take to build a new one? Meanwhile, her son was placed in temporary custody. Reporters camped outside the courthouse. Neighbors whispered. Was she running from an abusive past or hiding from a crime she'd never answered for? And in all the noise, one thing became clear. This was no ordinary fraud case. This was a story about a woman who lived as a ghost among us. And then came the twist no one expected. Her real name was finally unearthed. She wasn't just a fraudster. She was a wanted fugitive in another state, accused of financial crimes, and suspected in a disappearance years ago. For nearly a decade, she had been hiding in plain sight, using motherhood as her shield. Why would a woman steal a name, a life, and carry it like her own? During her second interrogation, Laura, or rather, the woman behind the mask, finally spoke. She claimed she had been running from an abusive partner, a man who threatened to kill her if she didn't disappear. But investigators couldn't find any trace of this supposed man. Was this another story in her arsenal of lies? Or was it the only truth she ever told? If someone told you they stole an identity to escape danger, would you believe them or demand proof? Her fingerprints finally told the story she wouldn't. Cross-referencing old records, the FBI revealed she was once charged with embezzlement and linked to a suspicious death of a coworker years ago. The charges back then had vanished when she did. But now, with a child involved in years of fraud uncovered, there was no vanishing this time. Should the sins of the past outweigh the life you've built in the present? Especially if a child is in the picture? In a heartbreaking moment, her son, just 9 years old, was interviewed by Child Services. "She's my mom," he said, tears streaking his face. "She makes pancakes on Saturdays. Why are they saying she's bad?" It was the one truth that made this entire case unbearable. Whatever name she carried, whatever past she buried, to him, she was just mom. Should a child's love influence how justice is served? Soon, the story became national news. Headlines screamed, "Mother or monster, the woman who lived a lie," and child torn between two identities. Strangers on social media formed sides, some saying she was a survivor, others branding her a criminal mastermind. And all the while, the woman at the center of it remained silent. In court, her attorney dropped a bombshell. She wasn't alone. There was a network, a dark underworld that sold stolen identities to women trying to escape violence, debt, and sometimes justice. She claimed she paid for her new life not out of greed, but out of desperation. But was this the truth or another mask? Would you sympathize with someone who broke the law to escape their own tragedy? The trial room was tense. Every chair filled, cameras flashing like lightning. On one side, prosecutors painted her as a manipulative fraudster who preyed on a vulnerable system. On the other, her defense portrayed her as a desperate mother trying to give her son a chance at normalcy. Whose story would the jury believe? If you were on that jury, would you see her as a mother or a master deceiver? One by one, people from her past emerged. An old neighbor who remembered her from another town. A former co-worker who swore she vanished overnight years ago, leaving behind unpaid debts. Even a distant relative, tearful on the stand, saying they had searched for her for nearly a decade. Each testimony chipped away at the life she had built. Then came the boy, not as a witness, but as a voice read aloud in court through a letter. "I don't care what her name is. She's my mom. Please don't take her away from me." The room went silent. Jurors shifted in their seats. For the first time, the case felt less like law and more like a family being torn apart. Should the law ever bend for the sake of a child's heart? After weeks of testimony, the jury returned. Guilty on counts of fraud, identity theft, and child endangerment. But then came the twist. The judge, moved by the unique circumstances, offered a deal. A shorter sentence, mandated therapy, and a chance to regain custody if she agreed to tell the full truth of her past. The courtroom held its breath. She took the deal. Today, she served a reduced sentence while her son stays with a foster family, waiting for the day she comes back. This time, not with a new name, but with the truth. Some call it justice. Others call it mercy. But for one little boy, it's just a story of a mother who disappeared behind a mask and is fighting her way back. What do you think? Was justice served, or was it sacrificed? In the end, this story isn't just about stolen identities or courtroom verdicts. It's about the lengths a parent will go to protect their child and the thin line between right and wrong when desperation becomes your only option. What would you have done if you were in her shoes? Would you have taken a risk or faced the harsh reality of losing everything? We want to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and share your perspective. Do you believe she deserves a second chance? And while you're here, don't forget to subscribe for more true crime cases that challenge the way we see justice, identity, and the human heart. Each story we share uncovers a side of humanity rarely seen, and you don't want to miss what's next.